All right, so let's dive right into this.
Yeah.
Today we're tackling a global debate that's got everybody talking. Like, imagine just walking by and you overhear this super intense argument.
Oh, yeah.
One side is like totally convinced that intervening in this conflict overseas is like the only right thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
But the other side is like,
Those of you posting, I stand with Ukraine, I just have a sincere and legitimate question for you. What do you want the U.S. to do? Do you want us to put boots on the ground? If that's the case, then what is the reason you are going to give the mothers who are going to lose their sons in this foreign war? What would you say to the wives whose husbands are going to come back in a casket with a flag draped over them? What would you say to the sons and daughters who are going to grow up without fathers because their father died on Eastern European soil? And for what? This is not our war. Or maybe you just want us to send more money or more firepower. Even the conservative estimates are that we have sent over $100 billion. We have sent millions, tens of millions of rounds of ammunition. We've sent rockets. We have sent it. What is more going to do except continue to kill off this generation of young Ukrainian and Russian men? It seems to me the only position for the U.S. to take on this is one of peace through mediation. And that this I stand with Ukraine stuff is a lot more like virtue signaling by people who maybe their hearts are in the right place, but have not thought through the reality of what they're saying. If you stand with Ukraine, maybe you should fly over there and stand on Ukrainian soil next to these young men that are dying in the trenches. Put up or shut up.
whoa, hold on a sec. Worried about all the consequences if we get involved.
Yeah, it's a real tug of war, isn't it?
It is. It's messy, right?
Definitely messy. You've got these two really powerful forces going head to head,
Yeah.
The interventionists, sometimes you might even call them the warmongers. And then on the other side, you have those who are really advocating for peace and diplomacy, right?
Exactly. And that tension, that's exactly what we're going to get into in this deep dive.
For sure.
So now let's look at how public opinion on this specific conflict has been changing. And this is where things get really fascinating.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
Because we have two leaders who are taking very different approaches to this same really complex situation.
It's like a case study in leadership, how different styles play out in the real world and how they influence people's perceptions.
And the polls, they're showing a pretty dramatic shift too.
Really?
Like there's been a huge swing in approval ratings when it comes to how people view this conflict.
That's a big deal, a swing like that in such a short amount of time.
It is.
It tells us people are really changing their minds about
Yeah.
this conflict and what they want to see happen.
Yeah, and when we dig a little deeper into that polling data, we see this growing majority of Americans who just want the conflict to be over.
They want a solution.
They want it resolved quickly, even if that means some territories need to be given up.
So they're willing to compromise.
They are.
Interesting.
And at the same time, the percentage of people who support continuing to fight, that number is dropping steadily.
That's a really important trend to watch.
It is.
It shows that people are getting tired of this war.
Yeah,
They're looking for a real solution, even if it involves some tough choices.
right. It seems like peace and stability are becoming more important than
One of
ever.
our priorities, right?
They are.
Even if it means some really difficult compromises along the way.
And to really understand how much things have changed, it helps to look back at previous years.
Okay.
What we see is this really striking picture of evolving opinions.
Hmm.
There's this clear movement towards wanting peace and compromise.
So what about those who still see the other side as the enemy?
Well, here's a statistic that'll really make you think. The number of people who view that specific nation involved as an enemy has dropped significantly.
That suggests a softening, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
Like maybe people are ready to move towards reconciliation.
It's like this little glimmer of hope,
It is.
that maybe we can move past all these dug-in positions and find some common ground.
It reminds us that peace building, it's not easy and it's complicated,
Yeah,
but it often starts with these subtle changes in how we see each other,
right.
that willingness to look beyond just seeing someone as the enemy and recognize that we're all human.
Absolutely.
This shift in perspective is like super important because it really challenges those simple narratives, the ones that always seem to dominate these conversations about global conflicts.
Yeah.
It encourages us to move beyond that whole us versus them thing and
Wow.
start to recognize just how complicated these situations really are.
It's crazy how much public opinion can actually change in just a few years. Like, what do you think is causing this move toward peace and compromise?
Well, There's a bunch of factors at play here. One of the big ones is just the constant flow of information, in today's world.
Right.
Social media, 204/7 news, people are being bombarded with so many different perspectives more than ever before.
Yeah, you're right.
They're seeing firsthand just how devastating these conflicts are, and they're starting to question whether, those traditional military interventions are actually effective.
It makes sense, right? Like people are realizing that military force has its limits and looking for other ways to solve these problems.
Exactly. And let's not forget the economic realities here.
Yeah.
These interventions are expensive, the financial burden, it's huge. And people are starting to realize that maybe those resources could be used for better things.
Like diplomacy, development, maybe even problems we have here at home. So it's not just about the moral arguments against war, it's also about being practical, thinking about the cost in the long run.
For sure. And I think there's also a growing awareness that real peace, lasting peace, that takes more than just winning battles.
Right.
You have to address what's causing the conflict in the first place, things like poverty, inequality, and political oppression, that kind of stuff.
That's so important. It's easy to focus on the crisis that's happening right now. But we have to think about the big picture.
Yeah.
How do we create the right conditions for peace to actually take hold?
That's the question, right? And it requires a multifaceted approach, diplomacy, economic development, supporting civil society. It's about building bridges, not just walls.
It all goes back to that idea of peacemakers versus warmongers, doesn't it?
It does.
It's not just about whether we go to war or not. It's about how we think about these really complicated global challenges.
It's about recognizing that there's always more than one side to the story. And demonizing the other side, that almost never leads to anything good.
So how do we navigate all of this? I mean, there's so many different opinions. Public sentiment is changing constantly. What can everyday people do to promote peace and understanding?
Well, first, we have to stay informed, and involved. We need to be critical of the information we're consuming and seek out those different viewpoints.
Yeah.
We can't just rely on those little sound bites and the echo chambers we find on social media.
It's about being open to challenging our own biases and being willing to talk, respectfully with people who see things differently.
Absolutely. And it's about supporting those organizations, the groups that are working towards peace and diplomacy.
Right.
There are so many people out there doing amazing work on the ground, building those bridges, fostering understanding, and trying to resolve conflict peacefully.
It's a good reminder that we're not helpless,
Right.
We can all do something, play a role in creating a more peaceful and just world.
And I think that starts with remembering that we're all human. We may have different opinions, different beliefs, different backgrounds, but at the end of the day, we're all sharing this planet. We all have a stake in making sure there's a future where peace can actually win.
This deep dive has been so eye-opening for me.
Yeah.
It's really made me think about the complexities of global conflicts and the different ways we can approach peace building. What do you think is like the biggest takeaway?
I think the big one is that peace isn't something that just happens.
Yeah.
It's not passive. It's something you have to work for. It requires constant effort, dialogue, and the willingness to challenge the way things are.
Right. It's about recognizing that there are no easy answers.
Nope.
And those simple solutions, they rarely ever address the root of the problem.
Exactly.
And it's about empowering people, everyday people, to be the ones who make change happen, to use their voices and their actions and their resources to support those peacemaking efforts around the world.
It's a call to action.
It is.
To move beyond the warmongering and embrace the path of peace.
And to remember that even the small things we do, they can make a difference.
They do. They create ripples.
Yeah.
And those ripples can lead to a more just and peaceful world for everyone.
Subscribe to our podcast, available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. We are here to make things clear. New episodes every day.